I'm gonna be honest, today's topic is a little bit close to my heart because we're gonna be taking a look at no one else other than Godfrey motherfucking Ho. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Some have called him the Hong Kong equivalent of Ed Wood, while others simply know him as the guy who put ninjas in literally every single movie that may or may not have needed them. He was the cut and paste master, combining original footage with another movie that literally had nothing to do with the topic. And it's all amazing. So today we're gonna look at the career of one of Hong Kong's most prolific and notorious film directors. And like with most things that we cover on this channel, like on a surface level, really it's not everything that it's made out to be. So that's why we're going to be taking a look at the story of Godfrey Ho today. Godfrey Ho was born sometime during 1948 in Hong Kong as Ho Chi Kweng. I probably butchered the hell out of that, but much of Godfrey's early life is unknown, really. However, he really enjoyed movies. However, what you're gonna realize really quickly is that Godfrey Ho has a pretty good sense of humor, so when he was asked why he became a filmmaker, this is what he had to say. Why I did this? It's because when I was young, I saw airplanes in the sky. I thought if I do this job, I can get a chance to fly, to take a plane, because at the period of time, we were so poor. It was hard to pay a ticket. After that, I traveled too much. I enjoyed my work. And the best part is he was laughing through most of his statement, but I think there's a bit of truth in there. Initially, Godfrey wanted to become an actor, and at the age of 17 attended film school in Canada, but because his English wasn't very good, he was sent home fairly early on during his film school career. I actually really admire the man's balls, because at the age of 17, he decided he was going to become an actor and attend film school in a completely different country that he barely knew the language of. Like, what? He started working for the Shaw Brothers when he was in his 20s. He was referred to by a friend to get the job and started off in continuity for director Chang Che, who made stuff like Five Deadly Venoms, One-Armed Swordsman, etc., etc. Godfrey said in an interview, "Camera is good, but if you work as an assistant, you can only become a DP. And technical stuff are not my expertise, so why not director?" His friend then said, "Okay, if you want to be a director, you have to start as continuity." Godfrey replied, "Alright, cool." This right here kind of exemplifies Godfrey Ho's personality, and probably one of the reasons I love the guy so much. His entire philosophy on life is pretty much, fuck it, that sounds cool, let's just go do it. After working there for about a year, he was bumped up to assistant director under Chang Che. He even worked side by side with the legendary director John Woo after he got a job working as an assistant director as well. Godfrey Ho being first assistant while John Woo was the second assistant. However, Ho would later explain that Woo was more like an editor rather than the second assistant director, as John Woo only worked for the Shaw Brothers for about a year. While working under Chang Che, Godfrey would explain that the man never really shot anything in the morning because he was a late sleeper, but his staff were expected to be there in the morning. So because they had the time off, most of Ho's colleagues would be out gambling, while Godfrey himself would spend most of his time in the other departments learning about dubbing and how the editing process would work. No doubt that this was completely invaluable when he would later go on to do his ninja exploitation movies, but it also shows that the man genuinely loved filmmaking from the very beginning. Godfrey Ho would end up leaving the Shaw Brothers to work on his first film as a producer known as Paris Killers. However, what started off as a production gig would become something way more that would alter his career. Paris Killers is considered Godfrey Ho's directorial debut, however, at first he was merely a producer on the film, and upon arriving to the set, Godfrey learned that the intended director didn't know how to direct anything. I'll save my personal opinions for Godfrey Ho for a little bit later on when it comes to his filmmaking, but imagine that all you know about him is that he's that guy who made those shitty ninja movies in the 80s and early 90s, and that he's considered the Ed Wood of Hong Kong. Now imagine that you're the guy that was so bad at filmmaking that this is the man that had to take over for you. In fairness, Godfrey hadn't directed his ninja exploitation movies yet, but still. It also turns out that the group had to finance most of the movie themselves, with Godfrey Ho needing to borrow roughly 400,000 yen from his father, which equaled out to a little less than $4,000. However, upon the film's completion, they didn't quite understand how distribution worked. So they sold the movie rights for about $5,000 to a distribution company named Ocean, who would then reportedly go on to make a very sizable amount of money on the film. What's interesting is that Godfrey clearly understood his strengths and weaknesses as a director at this point in time and didn't have any delusions as to what kind of films he could or could not make. In other words, he wasn't trying to create artistic level shit, and he wasn't aiming for super high quality. Following the departure with the Shaw brothers, Godfrey Ho would take up a job working under a Korean film company known as Aso Asia. Here, he would meet Joseph Lai and Thomas Tang, two individuals who are also known for creating Z-level trash media on the same level as Godfrey Ho. Godfrey would work on projects for this company for about 6 to 7 years. The kicker in this time frame was that the world was infatuated with movies based around Hong Kong, and with the VHS market beginning to boom, the company knew they could make a profit creating low-budget martial arts flicks based around the area. So Godfrey Ho was hired to create multiple cheap martial arts flicks at the time. It also helped that film production in Korea was far cheaper to produce than in Hong Kong itself. The movies were sold to Western audiences, or really anything else that was away from the Asian markets, as they sold way better fucking everywhere else in the world. The total amount of martial arts flicks Ho created during this time frame is unknown, much like his more famous 80s ninja movie run. However, some notable standouts are Golden Dragon / Silver Snake, 1979, Incredible Shaolin Thunder Kick, 1982, Bruce Lee's Way of Kung Fu, 1979, and Raiders of Buddhist Kung Fu, 1982. The last one almost reminds me of like a porn parody title, but it's like a martial arts parody instead. I fucking love Godfrey Ho. In truth, Godfrey Ho was only the co-director on a lot of these movies. He would reveal later in life, however, for distribution, he was credited as the sole director. He would share directing duties with various Korean filmmakers at the time, though. However, there's like a weird misconception that he wasn't there on location for filming, which is completely untrue. He was there for almost all of his film's productions, however, he was more like the overseer, only stepping into directing duties when it was really necessary. Think almost like a Kevin Feige situation, but with a more hands-on experience when it comes to how he was creating the films, rather than just like an executive producer's role. These were all being released during the Bruceploitation era of filmmaking, where various companies attempted to capitalize on Bruce Lee's death and release a metric shit ton of films with Bruce Lee knockoffs. Probably the most famous of these Bruceploitation movies, and the one you've probably heard of no doubt, is Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave. Most of these films utilized a man who went under the moniker of Dragon Lee, who was a martial artist used to imitate Bruce Lee during this time frame. However, minus the Bruce Lee's Way of Kung Fu, Ho didn't really play up the exploitation like a lot of other film companies at the time were doing. However, Godfrey Ho's destiny would change after Enter the Ninja, created by Canon Pictures, came out in 1980. Godfrey knew that he could capitalize on the ninja frenzy that was just starting to begin over here in the West. However, in order to keep costs low but production high, Godfrey would utilize films that were either unfinished, unreleased, or released in limited releases in other parts of the world in order to sell it to the American market. One of the main reasons why Caucasian actors were generally cast in the role of ninjas was in an attempt to appeal to Western audiences, as these films were mostly sold there. On the website searchmytrash.com, they state that releasing these films domestically would have been met with a bizarre reaction, with the locals seeing Caucasians running around in ninja outfits. However, Godfrey knew this would sell in the West after seeing Enter the Ninja, and it did. Godfrey also stated in regards to hiring Caucasian actors, why not produce some kind of movies with foreigners in them? To get all the foreign people here, you are from the US. You want to have fun? Come. You're from France? Great, join in. Wherever they come from, but no Chinese. And then we make them ninjas or anything. Also, Asia went defunct as a company before Godfrey Ho could pitch his ninja idea. However, both Joseph Lai, who had started IFD Films and Arts as a company and distributor, and Thomas Tang, respectively, had started their own production company and loved the idea of making these ninja movies with Westerners in them. So with the help of these two people and a handful of Caucasian actors, Godfrey Ho set out to create the ninja-sploitation genre. And the man who would become the face of ninja-sploitation would be a veteran B-movie actor in the Asia territories, Richard Harrison. Fun side note, Harrison claims to only have signed up for one ninja film. However, Ho would continuously reuse his footage and put him as the star of the movie. Harrison also blames Ho for derailing his career. This is entirely possible, as Harrison's character name in almost every single one of these movies is named Gordon. It's almost like a ninja version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger issue.
Godfrey said of Harrison, "Richard is good, a very good guy, a kind of gentleman," showing once again that Godfrey Ho has a lot more class than I will probably ever have. Harrison was kind of like a Franco Nero lookalike, which was perfect as Enter the Ninja was the inspiration for this whole genre of film. Godfrey Ho would explain that he did almost all the editing and dubbing on these films. Oftentimes, IDF would hire other people to assist with the directing for when the Westerner bits would be shot. However, he was also still the principal director on the films. And also, to keep the budget low, Godfrey would also shoot in many of the same locations. Which is why if you watch anything from Ho's filmography of this era, and a couple of his ones a little bit later on, you'll start to notice a lot of similar locations being shot at. IDF would also purchase the film rights from various Asian markets at a super low cost to help supplement the filmmaking. Godfrey said, because the video market was still okay, distributors from Turkey, they would buy the copyrights for $5,000 US. For example, distributors, producers only care about the money, filmmakers care about the art. That's the difference. And one final note, that the entire process itself to create these films would take only a few weeks. Man's a god. Honestly, it would be a little difficult from here to list every single film Ho ever created in this time frame, as there are probably literally hundreds of these, and a lot of them have never seen a Western release and are just lost to time. But of the ones that still exist, here are a couple of the highlights, including and not including Harrison. Ninja Thunderbolt, released in 1984. Ninja Squad, 1987. Ninja Dragon, 1986. Ninja in the Killing Fields, 1984. Ninja Silent Assassin and Black Ninja, 1987, and one of my personal favorites, Full Metal Ninja. For those of you that were wondering who the guy was on the cover with the ninja headband, his name is Pierre Kirby, and that actual image was taken from Full Metal Ninja. He wasn't a regular in Godfrey Ho's staple, but starred in roughly 8 or so other Godfrey Ho films. See, Richard Harrison wasn't the only Caucasian that would be in the starring roles, he was just the most notable and famous of the bunch. In truth, these films would have various different people rotating in and out of the cast of main characters, all varying in number of films they starred in. Godfrey Ho may have been the most prolific of the trio of cut and pasters, but Joseph Lai and Thomas Teng would each also direct some of these cut and paste style ninja movies, with Godfrey acting as a producer and editor and dubber on these films. But both of them really deserve their own video in the future, so I'll touch on them another time.
What a useless guy.
A lot of these movies aren't super rare because you can still find a lot of them to purchase online on like Amazon and eBay and stuff like that. The unfortunate thing though is that most of them are not going to be on DVD. With the success of ninjasploitation slowly phasing out, as all trends do, Godfrey would also start dipping into other genres of film to see what could work and be sold as well. One of the first would be the sudden rise in kickboxing movies, probably because of Van Damme's movie The Kickboxer. However, other genres would be looked into as well. Two of the most notable and probably most famous would be Thunder of Gigantic Serpent and Robo Zombie. The former honestly isn't really that bad of a movie if you're into shitty kaiju movies like I am. The latter, though, is kind of a different story altogether. Basically, the plot revolves around a corrupt group of people who are smuggling drugs inside the bodies of these vampire warrior ghost things who will fight people on command, and the only one who can stop them is is the Silver Samurai. It's supposed to be RoboCop, but he looks like a shitty Silver Samurai knockoff. Side note, in the past, Asian markets really loved RoboCop, with tons of non-associated works and tons of inspiration being taken for various tokusatsu-related media. Anyway, here I'll explain how frenetic a Godfrey Ho movie is. Generally speaking, these ninja plots, or in this case RoboCop vs. Vampire plot, will only take up about 30 to maybe 40 minutes of runtime. The remainder is a plot from an entirely different movie that's been redubbed over and is only loosely connected to the other. The way they get away with this is they have a cutaway shots of different people having a quote-unquote conversation about the current events to loosely tie the two films together. However, generally the movie that is being ripped off is from a decade prior, so you'll be able to tell almost immediately these are not from the same movie.
To have all of you present here is a pleasure, General Karpov.
Orson, I didn't come here to socialize, although I do want to congratulate you for doing away with Johnson. You handled that very well. The main reason I'm here is to warn you about Brian.
Do you mean O'Reilly? I've heard about that guy.
In Robo Vampire, the other plot is centered around a kidnapped woman who needs to be saved by mercenaries. The way this is tied into the RoboCop plot is that the people who kidnapped the woman work for the guy who also created the vampires. And that's it. I can't do justice on just how fucking crazy and an amazing experience this movie is, so you should just go and watch it yourself. To the best of my knowledge, the only streamable film of Godfrey Ho available on Amazon at the moment is Robo Vampire. Personally, I think one of the main reasons why a lot of these Godfrey Ho movies aren't able to be like streamable or they don't have DVD releases is because a lot of the music in the movies are completely lifted from other artists. Everything from like Pink Floyd to fucking Queen. My favorite example of them lifting music is actually from a Joseph Lai movie entitled American Force 2: The Untouchable Glory, which is streaming on Amazon, but you do have to pay to rent it, where they lift Alphaville's Jet Set Society for a fight scene. And it's as glorious and dumb as you would think it is. Because they were a Hong Kong-based company, I'm sure they weren't really too worried about American copywriters coming after them in the 80s. Today, though, that's a bit of a different story. Also, don't worry about the sequel numbers when it comes to any of Godfrey Ho movies. They're really just there more so as like a marketing tactic to get people to buy them, rather than having anything to do with the actual plot or plot progression of the series. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the rumors and speculation in regards to Godfrey Ho, Joseph Lai, and Thomas Tang, but keep in mind, these are just kind of like speculative rumors at best. Godfrey Ho himself has gone on record to discredit some of these claims, but they still persist, so take everything kind of with a bit of salt, but I do want to bring them up because they are talked about a lot. So one of the first of many rumors is that people claim Godfrey Ho was in fact Thomas Tang. This was supposedly done in order to circumvent the contract he was under with Joseph Lai. However, Godfrey Ho also worked for both of them in Aso Asia, so it doesn't really hold water. The idea of Godfrey Ho having to pull, I think it's like a Superman 3 or Superman 4, I can't remember, but where he has to keep changing clothes and changing his appearance in order to fool Joseph Lai, a la Superman trying to fool Lois Lane and whoever that girl was that he was dating. I think it was Superman 4, but that whole image in my head of him constantly needing to do that at IFD Productions, I don't know, it's just fucking hilarious, and it almost feels like it would be something that would be attached to the Godfrey Ho mythos. The other rumor is that Godfrey Ho had connections with the Triads, which is always possible given the time frame and location that these movies were being shot at, but because there's like no actual hard evidence, I would just chalk this up to speculation at best. There are many factors that could have led to the decline of the cut and paste style of filmmaking that's synonymous with Hong Kong filmmaking at the time. Some argue that American companies just began producing similar work, albeit with better marketing, but I believe it's three separate factors. One was the arrival of Godfrey Ho's friend and former colleague John Woo as a director. He had a similar vision to that of Godfrey Ho's when it came to action movies, which I'll elaborate more on in just a second. John Woo was able to elevate the Hong Kong film market in a way that really hadn't been seen before with some of his action classics like Hard Boiled and The Killer. If I was a consumer in the early 90s, why would I want to spend money on a crap movie that combines two different movies together, the dubbing is horrible, and the writing is schizophrenic at best, when I could spend the exact same amount of money on a higher quality action movie from a pretty well-renowned director? And you gotta keep in mind, this at the time, the whole idea of buying stuff and liking stuff because it's so bad, it's so good, hadn't really hit the mainstream yet. The second being, like any trend, audiences eventually grow tired and just move on to something else. Really, you can only keep doing the same thing so long before it starts to bore your audience. And finally, and what I think is probably the most important aspect, is that Joseph Lai's refusal to offer stock in the company to Godfrey Ho. Godfrey Ho claims via a verbal agreement that Joseph Lai would in fact give him stock in the company and also pay him for all the extra duties he did. Well, he lived up to his namesake because it's something Joseph Lai never did. It took Godfrey Ho's wife to convince him that it would probably be best to leave and start his own company at the time. Honestly, I think this is where a lot of the rumors regarding Godfrey Ho actually being Tang come from, because at the same time he was creating the cut and paste ninja movies and like action movies later on, he was also in the process of creating other films. Also, when Tong left IDF, he started his own company known as Filmark International, which is honestly very similar in name to Filmwell. The rumor always was that Godfrey had worked for both Joseph Lai as well as Thomas Tang. However, in an interview, Godfrey Ho had stated that he was only loyal to Joseph Lai and did not go over to Filmark. My thought is, a lot of people on the internet saw that the film production companies were really close in name, and they probably thought it was just Godfrey Ho trying to be slick. Which is kind of hilarious in hindsight because as you read interviews with the man, he's pretty down to earth as you realize a lot of the mythical nature of him has been grossly misinterpreted or over-exaggerated. Calling him Hong Kong's Ed Wood is, yeah, for sure a much more interesting story to tell, but it's not entirely accurate, and I don't think it paints a completely good picture of who the man of Godfrey Ho actually was in terms of his filmmaking. And this may surprise a lot of people, but later on in life, Godfrey Ho would actually become a professor at the Hong Kong Film Academy, where he still teaches classes to this day. Which I'll touch on more in just a little bit, but this might surprise a lot of people, but Godfrey Ho is actually a very competent filmmaker when given the opportunity. Godfrey Ho never disguised the fact that a lot of his schlocky cut and paste movies were really just a job to put money on the table. He didn't hate his films by any means and enjoyed making them, but he wasn't lying to himself about their quality either, regardless of how trash or amazing you think that they are. During his final run working at IDF, Godfrey Ho would create a few action movies under his new studio known as Filmsville. And this may surprise a lot of people, but by all accounts, they're actually pretty good movies. I'm not even kidding either. One in particular that I discovered while researching this topic on the website Search My Trash is a film entitled Lethal Panther, which stars two female assassins who are caught up in the middle of a gang war that have to hunt one another. Alright, it's not a perfect movie by any means, but my initial arguments earlier about John Woo and Godfrey Ho having a similar philosophy when it comes to action movies, I think rings true very much so with this film. Honestly, it's hard to watch Lethal Panther and not get a John Woo vibe. The camera work, acting, and pacing are all very much like a John Woo film in the late 80s and early 90s. Lethal Panther was released in 1990, right in between The Killer, which was 1989, and Hard Boiled, which was in 92. This means while Godfrey Ho was creating his schlocky ninja movies, he was also creating a fairly decent Hong Kong action flick. Hard Boiled clearly had a larger budget, but given the different circumstances, and if Lethal Panther had a larger budget and maybe another draft written for the story, I don't know, things might have turned out a little bit different. Honestly, I don't want to say too much on what could or could not have been better at the film as to not taint your viewing, but I say there's enough good stuff in there for a watch. Plus, it's on YouTube, so you don't have to try and hunt down a now out-of-print DVD or like a $15 VHS copy. Honestly though, it's kind of funny to think that in some parallel universe, Godfrey Ho is considered the action movie genius while John Woo is the schlocky ninja guy. Really, in a lot of these situations, it's only by a slim margin of circumstance that this stuff kind of happens. And really, Ho's never been able to shake the stigma off of those 80s and 90s like really crappy cut and paste movies, which he is very rampantly, but at the same time justifiably known for. One example was after directing the torture porn movie entitled Men Behind the Sun 2 Laboratory of the Devil, he was even ridiculed for cutting and pasting the original torture scenes from the first movie into the sequel, when in fact he had restaged and reshot almost down to the T from how the original had done it. Following these particular movies, he went on to create a few action movies with Cynthia Rothrock, which were relatively successful in the Asian markets as well as the Western markets, albeit they have a very B-flicky action vibe. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you people here, but I had no fucking idea who Cynthia Rothrock was before doing this video, so maybe the movies are good. I haven't seen any of them, so I'm gonna leave that up for you to decide. However, and unfortunately, Ho's stigma would never really allow him to reach the same heights as his friend and colleague John Woo. He never really made another movie on the same caliber as Lethal Panthers, in my particular opinion. Manhattan Chase starring Cynthia Rothrock would be his final movie before retiring from filmmaking to become a professor. Which led a lot of film critics to snark and laugh at him because how dare he teach students how to do something that he fucking loves how to do. What a fucking loser. Honestly, to quote searchmytrash.com, they put it best when they said, "Now, this has been a point of ridicule for many mal-informed film critics and wannabe critics who merely judge Ho by the quality of his ninja movies and are totally blind to the fact that Ho indeed was always a director who could get things done, no matter how poor the circumstances. And thus he is, in my eyes, more than capable of teaching aspiring directors the craft of filmmaking. Not the art of filmmaking, of course, but then again, you can't teach how to create art. You can only teach a craft. And sometimes, under ideal circumstances, as was the case with the aforepraised Lethal Panther, craft can evolve into something more. and I couldn't put it better than that. Godfrey would continue to teach at various universities and train students on all manner of practical filmmaking. Godfrey would state that he didn't want his classes to just be lecture-based like any other professor would have it, and he really strived to make the experience more hands-on. Which actually makes sense because he was able to pick up his craft similar to John Woo with a lot of hands-on experience when he worked under as an assistant director. As of now, he doesn't have any plans in particular to continue filmmaking and still works as professor of film. He has most recently made a cameo in the film Space Ninjas, which was created and released in 2019. Which unfortunately I haven't watched yet, but it's on a list of things for me to watch. I actually do have a recommendation though if you are into this kind of cut and paste filmography, and that is you might want to check out a YouTube series known as Ninja the Mission Force. It's almost 10 years old now, and it's made by some of the old Channel Awesome alumni, I think Brad Jones and Ed Glazer if I remember correctly, but despite your personal feelings on Channel Awesome, it does still have its funny moments. Some of the jokes have that Channel Awesome cheesiness, so take that for what you will, but surprisingly, the whole cut and paste ninja stories work really well in an episodic format. And if I could be completely real with you guys for a second, right around the time I was starting to turn my life around and start making better decisions with fucking everything I was doing, this show came out and I was able to watch it in its original incarnation, and it had a pretty decent effect on my life. Not that I learned anything great from it. It was just right around that time I started to kind of wake up and stop being a complete piece of crap in my life. And that's when I got into a lot of these like really crappy Godfrey Ho movies. And it was in a place and a part of my life where it was really dark and really sad. And being able to watch these movies and this show kind of just like, I don't know, was able to kind of help push me through and get me to start going where, I am today. And that's why I think like Godfrey Ho's crappy cut and paste movies and the Ninja the Mission Force will always kind of have a special place in my heart. Now, in all fairness, season 1 is way better than season 2 is, if I remember it correctly, but I still think it's worth watching nonetheless. And that's the story of Godfrey Ho. It really is amazing how on the surface he's just known as that ninja guy, but really, like everything else in life, there's always so much more to people. I'll leave you guys with a quote from Godfrey Ho in regards to people who enjoyed his really crappy cut and paste movies, as well as some of his B-grade movies. Make sure to keep things light and rebellious, and I'll see you guys next time. I just want to thank them to have enjoyed our movies. Because they are commercial, don't treat them as some kind of masterpiece. It's like watching a TV game. If you're looking for good artistic value, no, sorry. At that period of time, I was not ready to do this kind of stuff. Maybe in the future. If I do another movie, I'll pay more attention to the script and mise en scene so as to make a good film. Godfrey Ho is a classy-ass individual.